afternoon, everyone. My name is Randy Jensen. I'm here to chair the session for the Hans Gross Emerging Researcher Award. And our speaker this afternoon is Dr. Kimitake Sato. He is from East Tennessee State University. He's been very interested in strength monitoring. He also has his #1 cheerleader here, who is just leaving to go sit down and watch him. And Kimmy has been very interested in looking at strength measures and a variety of other things. But in strength measures, you have to monitor what the athlete is doing, which brings him to here and measuring bilateral asymmetry in long-term athlete monitoring. Kimmy.
Thank you. I think my daughter always spends the time in our lab, so she can probably talk about this stuff just as well as I am. Thank you very much. This is a very honor, and then you guys are very brave that you're all here in a hot, kind of humid environment. So thank you very much listening to my talk today. Before I start, I want to kind of go through as a reflection for my involvement with ISBS. I started out as a first-year master's student at the Beijing in 2005, and I know that some of you were at the East Tennessee State last year. We hosted at the this conference in Johnson City, Tennessee, and then this year I was able to receive this award. So it's very privileged and then also an honor to be up on the stage, because if you think about this, this is just a once in a lifetime. You know, I can't get this over and over. I have to watch some others get this award. So this is very honor for me to stand here. And then also my graduate work at the Berry University in Miami and the University of Northern Colorado and USOC. Those are my past work at the different institutions. And then of course I can't forget to thank enough that these people didn't tell me what to do when I was there. These people told me to do whatever I want to do, and I kind of thank them for not trying to strangle me with their ideas, but also kind of expand my ideas on doing the bilateral asymmetry studies. So I want to thank for those mentors that I had over the years. And some of you met those people last year in Johnson City. I can't thank enough for my colleagues and Dr. Mike Stone, Meg Stone. They're the leader of sports science in the United States. And they were the one kind of putting all together for us to work with athletic population on a daily basis. And of course, without our strong, very strong graduate program, we have over 20 PhD students every year. We have over 30 master's students every year. And some of them want to take over a lot of research component. And then I want to thank those guys. And Chris Beatty, he's here. And he took most of what I'm going to present today during his PhD work. So I thank you for the involvement over the years. So getting back to this work, so athlete monitoring, basically what it is we can't do just a one-time shot study to understand what's going on. We have to be able to measure over an extensive period of time. So we have 4 years of collegiate career in the United States. So we get to measure at least 4 years. And if they are Olympic caliber athletes, we get to hold on to them for a little bit longer period of time. So we do daily base monitoring to weekly base, bi-weekly, monthly, and by semester base. So we get to do a lot of different research. And then my take in this part is to report some of the bilateral asymmetry stuff that we do. So how do we get actually started? This started out with USOC back in the 2006. So when I first got involved with the US Olympic Committee, I was able to work with some of the strength and power sports. And this is some of the things that we actually initiated back in the days, talking about bilateral asymmetry, looking at the left side, right side of the force production, and then also the trajectory of the bar, velocity of the bar. So why do we do this bilateral asymmetry? The research has been done specifically to the clinical field. So you're looking at the long-term tracking on a patient's recovery process. We see this all the time after the surgery or somebody who has pathological issues. And then also many practitioners that we know, we're talking about the physio people, the physical therapy people, the great magnitude of the asymmetry linked to the higher risk of injuries or pain or some kind of symptom. So we kind of know the big asymmetry is not the greatest thing to have. And in the literature, what we know is a post-surgery rehabilitation process. We want to dissipate that dysfunctionality, and we want to see what kind of return-to-play decision-making we can make. So we're trying to compare with the able side, or we look at the baseline data if we have it for the progress check. And if you actually look at the literature, it's actually kind of people like us doing a lot of bilateral asymmetry stuff over the probably last 5-6 years or so. We're looking at the literature. Most of the stuff we find is the people here in the audience present the data on bilateral asymmetry, not so much going on, especially on the athletic population. We see this a lot in the clinical field, but we don't see this a lot in the athletic population. So this is a good group to talk about bilateral asymmetry stuff in a performance aspect, because it doesn't happen all the time when you go outside, going into the clinical field. So considering the several factors for research, just because we are interested in bilateral asymmetry, that doesn't mean that we can do this all the time in any aspect. We have to look at some of the important components. So first one, we've seen this before with the endurance athletes, talking about the runners. I know in the past, we've looked at some of the runners, looking at the bilateral asymmetry, how does it link to some kind of overuse-related injuries. And then you also have to consider, when you actually pull the subjects, are we looking at somebody who's one-sided dominant sports? We have pitchers in baseball, and then we have, let's say, the golfers. So we have one-sided sports athletes versus we have field sports or court sports who goes both ways. So how do we actually determine the bilateral asymmetry is good or bad in a certain athletic population? And then here's another one, looking at the cyclist. We get this a lot from the cyclists when we work with USA Cycling and then triathlon team. They always come up with some kind of power side. They call it, this is my power side. And how do we know it's good to have those? Or how do we know that if that is actually the true power side? So we can actually look at the bilateral asymmetry that way from the preferred limb in this case. And then identification of good and bad. This is coming to our end as a sports scientist. What measurement really matters to evaluate? A lot of time we collect a lot of data. If you actually do the motion analysis of force plate data, we get tons of data. And then we put it on the paper, but we don't really know what's really important from the practical aspect. So we have to really evaluate what we're actually looking at to be able to interpret back to the coaches. And then here's another one talking about the measurement perspective. Does the average value have a small or large variance? Because most of the time, it's kind of going up and down, that if you have average here and then standard deviation here, it's just a large variance that it's very individual-based information. It's not really an average data. So we have to actually look at a different perspective on the statistical analysis. So the purpose of testing the bilateral asymmetry in our athlete monitoring, of course, we want to look at the biomechanical and then physiological changes over time. And if we have a baseline data, and most of the time we have the baseline data when they actually arrive to East Tennessee State, and then if they show the high asymmetry, what we do is we actually color code with a shirt. So East Tennessee State is blue and gold. If I have somebody who has a big asymmetry, we put them in a yellow shirt when everybody else wearing the blue shirt. So we know who to watch for. So the strength coach know who have that little bit of high magnitude in asymmetry. And if the baseline data is present, in case the athlete gets injury, we always have something to go back to. In other words, this is a good example on the range of motion on the left side and right side of the knee. We can look at it and then have a baseline data and then kind of track and see how much they can actually come back to. So what are we interested in? As a scientist, we're looking at the trend across team or positions of that sport and respect to the playing level, because when we talk about the playing level, we have a different level of playing field. For example, we have a really good tennis team. We have an okay, let's say, baseball team or soccer team, and then we have, I don't want to say on the mic, but we have a terrible softball team, okay? So what are we looking at? And then we have Olympic caliber athletes who come in with lots of medals on the neck, and then that's how they show up their training center. And then how do we actually determine those kind of people depending on the playing level? I forgot to say about the relation to the potential injuries and performance, and then statistical purpose. So what I call it lockdown to p-values, when we actually do any kind of research, we're forced to kind of provide a p-values. So we kind of have to do some type of different measurement, to identify the difference, or we have to do some kind of correlation. So it's kind of hard to actually connect with the coaches, because down below, this is what coaches are interested in. They want to know the outliers. They want to know what makes them superior, or what they want to know why this person is so low in numbers, even though that person can play. Okay? And then also the individual characteristics. So over the 4 years of training, we see that numbers changes. Some go up quick and then hit the plateau, or some just stays and then never develop. So individual characteristics and then outliers are something that coaches are interested in. If I report the p-values with correlation, you know what's going to happen to coaches, right? So those are the kind of things that we have to consider when we report back to coaches. Having said, scientists must have a coach's eye in monitoring. So when we actually report back to coaches, we have to use a little different technique on the data display. And then this is one good example from Dr. Bill Sands looking at the trend analysis. So second year PhD guys in our class, they have to take alternative statistics. And then what we do is we randomly throw out the data and then make them actually create some kind of data display and then report back to coaches. So that's one of the tasks in a classroom. So some of the guys actually collect the data over the years from the USOC data or ETSU data, and then we actually create something like this and then be able to report as a trend analysis. Another thing we did was this is a sleep pattern with different mattress. And then looking at the different data, let's say that 0 as a 7 hours of sleep, and then we create the standard deviation plus minus 1, and then standard deviation plus minus 2. So we create those lines and then see where they fit into. So I color code a lot of things. So if you're colorblind, I'm sorry, you can't look at this. But blue indicates it's a good indication of being consistent. Yellow is on the watch list. Red is red flag. So we use this on the hours of sleep. So if you actually look at this, you can kind of see, I can give you an example, like throughout this time period, they used a really good mattress. And then, I don't know if well, we all have been to the college dorm and then how bad that mattress is, right? We know what we're talking about here, right? Like really hard mattress. And guess what happens to here? Okay? So those are the kind of things that we need to know to evaluate, because that can be external factors to cause some of the other data to show up really bad, sleep quality. So we measure these kind of stuff through some of the lifters from USA Weightlifting, or some of the people from the bobsleigh skeleton guys. So we actually use this kind of data to track their sleeping quality using a statistical process control or single subject design data. And then this is another one from Dr. Sands. This is strictly on a qualitative aspect. We're looking at the, where's the soreness coming from? So the left side, you're looking at the weightlifters. So after the session, and then a couple days later, we track them every other sessions. We let them fill out where's the soreness coming from. So they check, and then we consider it as a percentage. And then sure enough, quadriceps. Sure enough, maybe the lower back, something like that for the weightlifters. So we kind of know the trend of where the soreness is coming from for the weightlifters. I don't know if you can see on the right side. Can you all see, can you all read who is it coming from? This is actually the figure skaters. So we collect this from the figure skaters, and you're looking at this data from the figure skaters, kind of interesting stuff triggers. Because you're looking at this and thinking like, why is their upper back or lower back more than the legs or something, right? So we don't know this until we get the data from athletes. And then we go back to the coaches and say, this is what we got from the players, from the figure skaters, what we have to do. So we're trying to use this kind of data to connect back to coaches for training consideration or rest. So once again, data analysis and the data display technique is so important to close the gap between the scientific findings to the practical application. And then we talked about this, and this is part of the mission of ISBS, that we're trying to give that information back to coaches. It's not always what we do as a scientist data. We also have to meet with coaches' view. So let's go through some of the data here that we got. So some of the bilateral asymmetry stuff we've done over the years, early on it was kind of easy because we were trying to connect something with a strength level with a jump performance. So early on, we started initiating this approach with Chris Bailey's data. And we were looking at this from the level, well, I would say magnitude of asymmetry with the jump performance. So you're looking at this as a static jump, okay? And then you can kind of see here, the greater the asymmetry goes, the lower the jump. So individually, if you have so much asymmetry coming from the force production, push-off force from the jump, you see the jump start to go down, so for some of the individuals. And then you can also look at it from this way on looking at the, this is also the unweighted one, so counter movement jump. We're looking at the counter movement jump of asymmetry score on the net impulse and an actual jump height. So you can kind of see the line is shifting in a different way. So what we did on this graph is you look at it, we kind of draw the imaginary line on about 7 or 8% or so, because before it was all white. And then we were looking at it as like, okay, that's what it is. But when we actually separate at around the 7 to 8%, you see the distinct difference, okay? All of a sudden, after about 8% or so, and then you're looking at those people, everything starts shooting down on the jump height, okay? So how do we communicate with coaches? If we get this kind of data, this is pretty obvious. You know, you're looking at the early on study that if you have higher asymmetry from the force production, chances are the jump height start to go down. And looking at the net impulse data, you're looking at this. For these people, it's kind of hard because we don't know what the factors are. You're looking at this data, it could come from many factors. You know, we talked about the previous injuries that might have caused that data to show that the higher asymmetry, lower jump, or anatomical abnormality could be the one. You know, you can pull out some kind of excuse on why it shows up here, but as some of you know, we function as a strength coaches. You know, most of our graduate students and faculty came from the strength and conditioning background, when we actually look at this graph in the write-up, it wasn't so much attention on this side. It was actually a lot of attention for these people. So if you actually look at these people, this is pretty simple. They don't have asymmetry. They're just simply weak to get their body in a vertical direction. So this is a very simple factor that they need some kind of strength training. They need some kind of a neuromuscular adaptation to be able to jump that high. Okay? So this is where we actually focus on from the strength and conditioning standpoint. This one is more for the clinical aspect because we don't really know what factors are actually coming from to cause that asymmetry and the deficiency in the jump height. So that's how we actually communicate with coaches. And then this is another one. We're looking at the weight distribution asymmetry in a back squat. So you're looking at this from the static portion of weight distribution asymmetry. You know, some of you probably have done it, or if you haven't done it, this is as easy as it gets. You can put the scale and then just stand on it and then make sure that what we have is we have a line on the mirror, so make sure your center is on between the force plate and then you stand and then not moving, okay? So you can do those kind of stuff to measure the static weight distribution test. And then what we found in the back squat action is the greater magnitude of weight distribution asymmetry actually influenced the barbell movement during a back squat. So this is one example from the graph here. The person here, example from the unequal weight distribution group people, you're looking at the bar tilting. So when you say bar tilting, the bar is actually tilting this way. So even though it's only like 2.5 degrees or so, but if you're looking at this, the bar is going all over the place. And if you're a strength coach, it's very noticeable when the bar is going up and down in a tilting action, okay? And then if you look at the example from the equal weight distribution group, it's less than 1 degree. You're looking at this from the rotational aspect. Kind of same. If you actually watch the person from the sideway, you can kind of tell when the person is, you know, wherever it's coming from. It could come from the hip or knee or simply the torso. The rotating different parts of the area cause the bar to rotate. So we can actually look at that as well and see that the unequal weight distribution group shows some kind of movement in the rotational matter. So we're looking at this. The athletes who have excessive static, we're talking about the excessive. So we don't really know what percentage is the one. You know, it could be, you know, some people say 10% is the one or 15% is the one being an excessive category. We don't know because nobody knows. You know, it's very situation-based. And what we're trying to do is the same thing with, I mentioned earlier, is the color identification. If I see somebody who has, let's say, 20% or 25%, I give you the gift of a yellow shirt to the athlete. You get to wear this when you're in the weight room, so people know, okay? And that's how we know that the person is rotating. And this past year, I worked closely with the softball girls, and we had about 3 players, incoming freshmen, actually wore the 3 yellow shirts, okay? So we're kind of looking at it from the watch list perspective. And then another thing, because this is more of the hypothesis generating type of studies, a lot of our strengths coaches, along with the faculties, were talking about the speculation of what if that individual gets stronger? Is it going to carry over? That weight distribution asymmetry going to carry over, or it's going to dissipate? So the speculation rises as a monitoring tool to actually see dissipation of weight distribution asymmetry. And if you know the Dr. Mike Stone in our program, you know, this is the phrase that he almost have this thing tattooed on his forearm probably, strength matters, because he thinks that the strength has a lot to do with treating some kind of unwanted movement or some kind of problems in the pain or any kind of symptom. So what we do in the testing, some of you actually came to visit our laboratory last year during a conference, and we actually hosted a pre-conference on showing how we do the athlete monitoring, and then this is a part of the picture on doing the isometric misdipole. And isometric misdipole is kind of hard to explain what it is because that person doesn't move. So it's kind of difficult to show people how we actually do this kind of stuff. I don't know if there's a sound to it, but you can't really tell. But the only thing you can tell from this video is you can tell that guy is so red from here up, right? When he starts pulling, you can kind of tell this guy start to get red. So that's the only indication I can show people about the mid-dipole. It's kind of hard to show it, but that's how it goes on the testing. So from this kind of testing, we look at the different things. So we look at the force asymmetry on the sex and in strength level. And the first part is the female subject. We're looking at the jumps. So we have the 0 kilo, which is unweighted static jump, and then 20 kilo, just the barbell static jump. Counter movement jump with 0 kilo, counter movement jump with 20 kilo, and then you can see the comparison on the sex. And then you can kind of see the trend that the female subjects tend to have greater magnitude of asymmetry on all the tasks with some of the statistical significance. The second portion we look at it from the same paper is looking at the isometric mid-dipole, peak force, and then also the rate of force development between weaker subjects and then stronger subjects. So we actually separate the weak and then strong subject based on the isometric mid-dipole and then looking at the asymmetry value. And then this is also clear that the weaker subjects also display higher magnitude of asymmetry. Another study we did was looking at the same kind of task with the stronger, weaker subjects on the separated position, but this time it's not the isometric mid-dipole, it was the isometric squat. So the rack is raised with the already decided internal knee angle, and then you actually push isometrically on squat task. And then you can kind of tell here that the 1RM squat, the difference on the strong and then weaker group, but it also have the internal knee angle of 120 degrees and then 90 degrees on symmetry score. You can see that the weaker group also have a little bit higher. It's not too much because this is percentage based. So we don't know if this is significant from the practical aspect, but we can actually see that the weaker group actually show a little bit of high asymmetry from the weaker group. So based on this kind of data, how do we communicate with coaches? So because we're kind of oriented with a strength and conditioning field with very much focus on a periodization on the training protocol, so we have to actually program the strength and conditioning programs throughout the year. So you don't have to see this, but we create this for every single team that we work with. And sometimes if I work with the golfers, right now we have 8 golfers in the men's team and then 6 in the women's team. I have to make every single individual's training protocol based on their data. So we actually create this, and then this is the annual plan for that individual or for the team. So we create this as part of the package to work with athletic population. And if we find some weaker players to begin with, which happens all the time from, let's say, incoming freshmen as an 18 years old, the first time kind of introduced to the weight room, and then they come in very weak. So we have to actually request more weight room time for coaches. So we show the data and then ask coaches, hey, everybody's here, but he or she is here. So can we get more weight training time? So take out that person from the practice time and then spend more time in the weight room because we have that much gap between the average data to some of the outliers. So we kind of know that the strength asymmetry, whether it's a dynamic testing or from the jumps or isometric task from the squat or mid-side pull. So now we're shifting our study to, this was done probably in the last year and a half or so from our PhD guys. We're looking at the different tasks. So we look at the sprint performance, we look at the change of direction, and then any kind of agility testing. So we try to link if asymmetry that we show from the strengths perspective really affect the running portion. So as an exploratory study, what we did was looking at the 3-meter acceleration, and then partial time, and then total time of 505 change of direction task. So 505 is basically going straight out and then turn around. And then we have the timing gauge set up and looking at the time zone. So strength side and then non-strength side, so you see the SD and then NSD side. And then you see that the strength asymmetry from the isometric task really doesn't relate to this kind of task. So we're looking at this, oh, maybe it doesn't matter. But we need to know why that is causing this, because we're just looking at the raw value of time from the 505 change of direction and then doing the isometric mid-thigh pull or some kind of isometric strength asymmetry task. So the next study that we came up with from the data is looking at the foot contact. So we try to look at a little different perspective on the dependent variables. So we designed the exact same data, and then because the guy graduated, and then somebody else came in and then took over the idea, and then that's how we kind of roll with the, all these studies. We use the Optigate to measure the foot contact time, and then looking at how the foot contact time being influenced by some of the asymmetry information from the strength value. So we look at this, and the same thing happened. Isometric strength asymmetry does not correlate with 10-meter sprint time, 505 change of direction performance, and the ground contact time of those runs. So once again, the isometric force asymmetry is not the primary identifier for measuring those kind of tasks. So at this point, we did it twice in about a year and a half. And then this data actually came out a couple months ago from the Ben Gleason, one of my PhD students who just finished his dissertation. And same thing, I don't think we can carry on this information anymore. We kind of got to the point that's like, well, we did it twice in a different ways. Maybe we don't have to look at the strength asymmetry. You know, what we're trying to do is communicate with the coaches, right? So what we have to do is be face-to-face with the coaches and then say, we look at the strength asymmetry for change of direction, cutting movement, all that stuff. And then we say, maybe it doesn't matter, okay? And then we have to look at the other things to measure different way to detect why some players are so superior on cutting movement or changing direction compared to others. So, you know, we're on the next task of looking at different field in this case. So last portion of this is rehabilitation. There are a number of interesting talk throughout the conference this year on rehabilitation portion of it, and you know, kind of same thing. What we're trying to find is we're trying to identify return to play perspective for student athletes that we get, and we all have to evaluate. And then when we consider we at the East Tennessee State, we have a different group of people. So we have coaches, the king of the chain, and then we have strength coaches, we have athletics trainer, sports medicine personnel, and then we have a sports science group. So what we do is we actually sit in the same table and then create a plan. Whether it's the individual base, for the golfers, we do it individually. So sometimes the meeting goes so long because we're talking about the one individual to the other. Sometimes if it's team sports, we're looking at the team sports, and then somebody really good player, we talk about it individually. So when we have a we, that means we have this many people with expertise talking about the plan. So why rehabilitation in the collegiate setting? The rehabilitation program for collegiate athletes became more accelerated, relying on the active range of motion, early weight bearing, and early strength training to return athletes to play as quickly as possible. The problem with that is early return to actively get on the field to actually competitive play can result in a re-injury to the affected limb, the same side, the same one causing the injuries, and it's as high as 25% in the young athletes. So this is a problem. When athletes return to activity too quickly, then the unaffected leg also gets some kind of damage because that person is going to probably compensate to use that good side, and then guess what, to the good side? Likely to cause the injuries. So what we have to come up is a series of return to play decision-making tools. And this is what we did with the 2 years ago with one of my PhD students in a sports medicine program. So we tried to create a series of testing to see what could be the good measure to consider return to play decision-making. So this is the ordinal data from the active range of motion. We're looking at the person who had ACL surgery. So of course, that person came to our university. We had that baseline data. You can see it on here. And then that person got injured. And then we started out here, of course, because they can't move the leg. And then over time, from week 1 to week 9 progression, we start to see the active range of motion getting better. So we can actually track those from almost 2 to 3 days per week of testing. And then of course, the rehabilitation kind of goes every day with the athletes. But what we want to see is the trend of reducing that difference between the affected leg and an unaffected leg. So that's kind of a traditional way. We started throwing some jump protocol for these kind of individuals. So we see it here, it's the max force, max push force. So this is from the, let's see, the counter movement jump with a 20 kilo. So that person had a 20 kilo bar on their upper back and then do the counter movement jump. And this is the baseline data before that person got hurt. And then you're looking at anywhere from 2 to 4% range of the asymmetry value. And then you see on the other side, that's the post-operative data. So we're also tracking to see how much the asymmetry data start to go down before we say, okay, you're ready to go on the field. So this is from the push force, concentric action. And then we have that landing force. When you talk about the ACL, this is probably more important than actually the push-off force. And then you can kind of tell from the values, asymmetry data from the beginning, we see anywhere from 8.5% up to about 15%. That was the range from the baseline data. And then post-operative data, we initially saw 30% or 25%. And then that's kind of big range. So we have to wait for that number to come back down before we say, okay, he's ready to go. So we actually use the weighted counter movement jump as one of the consideration to decide whether that person is ready to go or not. Same thing with this data that we have 5 months, 6 months, and up to 12 months. So it's a lot of athlete monitoring going on. This is not done just because we report 5, 6, 12 months. We did this almost on a weekly basis of testing. So this is just one part of the data, how we saw the red line as a landing force, asymmetry data start to go down. We probably never reached a point where it get back to the baseline, but at least what we want to see is reaching that plateau to make sure that the person is ready to go. So how do we communicate with coaches? So wait for the go sign based on the several factors. And of course, the spec personnel, so 6 of us get together, talk about whether he's ready to go or not, but also the athletes, the psychological readiness. If the athletes don't feel like that person is ready to go, then he or she can't go back, right? So it's important that the athlete is ready to go from the psychological aspect. And then the percentage decline and then reach the steadiness, as I mentioned earlier, this is so important that we want to see that number going back to closer to the baseline data. So in summary, we think that the strengths may take care of some of the problems on the bilateral asymmetry if the intention is to correct it. If the intention is to correct bilateral asymmetry, I think we'll want to do the right things on having a physical development. It's kind of hard to say that because there are many other factors involved, but we think that the strengths is one of the priority for us, a bigger piece of puzzle. Because the reality check, when we actually look at the athletes, because we deal with athletes on a daily basis. You know, some days I get to see a little over 100 athletes in one day. And then, when we do the reality check, we start to see this trend that usually people come to us complaining about the pain or some kind of symptom. They're all weaker people. The stronger people usually don't come to us that often. So we're seeing this kind of trend from the practical aspect. Same thing with the some of the tasks. As I mentioned earlier on the sprint performance or change of direction, some of the stuff we don't really think that the strength asymmetry matters to the performance. So we're kind of getting rid of the idea of looking at the strength asymmetry for those kind of performance, looking at the short duration closed chain task or repetitive task in this case. So in our next direction for next several years, we want to create some kind of deterministic model on performance improvement and then also the long-term athlete monitoring. So we're trying to figure out the figure on if this happens, that person should do this, and then that leads to maybe this, then this, and this. So we're trying to create the model so we can follow the model and then stick with the plan. And then further into creating a potential injury detection, and then we all kind of do this. We've seen this throughout the conference on looking at the injury prevention type of data, but it's kind of important to know what actually triggers higher risk of injuries. And then confirmation of weak individuals having more musculoskeletal issues. I said this earlier that the strength matters. Is it really true? We have to do several confirmation study on looking at the different strength level and then how does that relate to some kind of pain or injury mechanism. And then lastly, presenting the ideas to coaches. That's the next step that I want to use this kind of data to actually work with coaches because one of the biggest things in our program is the coach education. So if we can educate the coaches to understand the scientific data, it makes so easy for us to work with them. So it's kind of hard for me to go into the coach's office every day trying to convince them. If we can educate them, it gets a lot better communicating from the science to practice. So lastly, I want to mention this because I get to have this opportunity to actually do this kind of lecture, and then this is, I mentioned this earlier, very honored. And a lot of people don't get to have this kind of chance, so I want to use this opportunity to actually reflect what I have done, what our program have done, what our graduate students in the past and in current have done for our program. So this is a great opportunity, and I hope some of you get to do this kind of stuff to reflect your work, that what you have done over the years. So thank you again. This is the picture from last year when we hosted at ISBS, and kind of gives me a good memory of what we have done at the East Tennessee State. And some of you came to Johnson City, and hopefully you can also look at this kind of picture and say, yeah, I was there. It was middle of nowhere, but we're in Tennessee. Thank you very much.